Hello and welcome back. Welcome back to the Massage and Bodywork Licensing Exam Review course. This is a course that's been specifically designed to refresh your memory and teach you a few extra things so that you can confidently and calmly take your MBLEx exam with very successful results. Today we're going to be talking about an important part of the exam called Guidelines to a Professional Practice. This is the second time we're covering this material because there's about 25% of your test that will be on Guidelines to a Professional Practice. So we're spending a little bit of extra time on this topic. Let's jump in and take a look at our outline and overview for the course. First, we're going to be talking about general professionalism, attire, communication, things, and giving you some examples of that. Additionally, we're going to be talking about some terms in healthcare, business, and legal terms that we're going to review with you so you're crystal clear on what those definitions are. We're also going to talk about client privacy, a policy called HIPAA, and a term called payer discrimination as well. As a part of our course today, we're also going to review the national standards that it takes to practice massage therapy, things like graduating from an accredited program, getting liability insurance, passing the national exam, and also the background check as a reminder that you'll be going through. The next point in our outline, we're going to cover social media. What is the proper use of social media? What's a social media policy? What are posts? Defamation, what's prejudice? We're going to clearly define these terms and help you to distinguish the best use of social media. Additionally, we're going to be defining terms franchise, sole proprietorship, and partnership as business entities. We're not going to dig too deeply into those. However, you will need to be familiar with those terms and their definitions, for there are questions like these on the exam. Additionally, we're going to be talking about sanitation and general cleanliness and taking a deeper dive into the CDC's sanitary hand washing techniques. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control. After reviewing sanitation and cleanliness, we are going to go through some definitions of common psychological terms and their application within the massage therapy world. We'll be looking at draping as well. What is safe? What is appropriate? And how do we communicate with our clients about that? And we'll be wrapping up today's session talking about ethical issues. What happens when we need to resolve questionable behavior in the treatment room? And what is the best protocol to follow for that? Does that sound like a lot to cover in one session? All right, well, I'm ready if you're ready. Ready, set, let's go. Let's do this thing. We begin by talking about general professionalism. Of course, our environment is going to set a tone. Our demeanor, our personality is going to also contribute to general professionalism. However, professional attire is essential. Leaving the spaghetti straps and tank tops at home, we need to be aware of what we wear to do massage. Some locations require a uniform. Others leave it up to the massage therapist. However, there are some examples of professional attire that is appropriate when doing massage. Another essential part of general professionalism is clear communication. Clear and honest communication falls under the Code of Ethics business category, client relationships. For effectiveness of the massage, a comfortable balance of communication from both the client and the therapist is necessary and determined by what is ideal for the treatment. Now, we've been taught in school that the client should control the amount of conversation that is happening in the treatment room. However, I need to be clear. Sometimes the therapist does need to interrupt, quote unquote, the quietness of the session to ask a clarifying question. And it's really what is ideal for the treatment for the client that is going to determine how much communication is going on. Always adjust the treatment for each client and take cues from the client as to the amount of talking that should be done. But please Don't feel intimidated if it's been a very quiet session, if you feel like it's time to ask a clarifying question. It's really what's ideal for the client treatment that determines the amount of conversation. In fact, clear communication is one of the 4 components of safe touch. We are going to look at intentionally establishing an environment that our clients feel is offering them safe touch. The very first step is clear communication. The second of our 4 components of safe touch is respect. So how do we show respect? Well, we listen more than we talk. We're considerate. We don't talk over other people. We preserve the dignity of our clients or our coworkers. If we have a matter to discuss, the best way to handle it is in a calm and private conversation, as opposed to a public screaming match or in front of other coworkers where we could be overheard. I'll tell you, a very important way to establish respect is to be on time. Our coworkers and our managers appreciate it, but our clients especially. It's one way our clients start to trust us. And trust is an essential ingredient to establish safe touch. The third component of safe touch is permission, asking permission. So when do we need to ask permission in a session? We ask permission during the intake. We get verbal and written permission to work areas such as the gluteal region or the pectoralis region. During the session, we may need to ask permission to skip a certain area if the client has requested we spend more time in one particular area. Again, we're establishing safe touch here. We don't want to leave the session with the client feeling like, oh, they never worked my arms. We ask permission if it's okay to skip a body part to spend more time on another body part. It's establishing that communication by asking permission, and it's all a part of making sure the client feels safe. The fourth component of safe touch is skill, a skillful touch. We use our skills, our expertise, our talent to do the best job that we can with that client. Now, having said that, remember our boundaries. No need to give 110%. If at times you felt like you've given 110%, that's really a boundary issue. You're taking your competence, your mastery, your ability, and bringing that to the session. And feel assured that your skill, your abilities are all that that client needs for today. At times, we have to refer to another therapist or maybe even to another healthcare professional that will help our clients with their current issues. However, just know that skill and the expertise that we have, when we apply it properly, establishes safe touch and trust with our clients. Honestly, we could spend the next hour talking about how to establish trust with our clients, how to create a safe space that allows our clients to feel that safe touch, to heal. However, it is time to move along. Healthcare, business, and legal terms. Exciting stuff, right? Well, it may not be exciting, but it's going to be interesting, I promise. We're going to talk about social media. First of all, a social media policy. And I'm not sure if your office or you personally have a social media policy. A policy is a code of conduct that provides guidelines to those who post content on the internet. Anything that is written on a social media site, whether it is Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, any comments that are made, anything that is written is called a post. Now, if you choose to use social media, and some people don't, they don't want to participate, and that's fine. But if you choose to, you must understand its purpose. Because if you do not, social media can bite you in the butt. Now let's take a look at Facebook. There are two options for Facebook: personal profile and a Facebook page. Some have one or the other. Some choose to have one or the other. Some have both. Are you already on Facebook with a personal profile? Let me ask you, Are you promoting massage services on Facebook, or are you using it just for personal interest? You must be clear on your intention, your footprint on the internet. You are making one whether you knew it or not. So you must be clear on what that intention is. I think intention is one of the most important parts of social media. However, let's get into some more nitty-gritty points. Do you know if you have a personal profile or a Facebook page? Can you tell the difference? Most people just set up their personal profile. However, if you set up a page, you'll know you did because you had to pick one of these 6 options. So if you think you have a fan page, you probably picked a artist, band, or public figure page. Maybe you picked local business. Most people pick local business or place. However, a little hint, if you do decide to set up a page to promote a service, then most people promoting a business, the better option is to choose company, organization, or institution. If you've got a brick and mortar location, absolutely, local business or place. However, most people choose the wrong thing there. So if you're going to promote your service at some point, company, organization, or institution. However, maybe you don't even want to worry about that and you just want to have a personal profile. That's the way most people go, is just with a personal profile. You can like pages, you can post things, and it's just for personal interest. Now, if you have a personal profile, you are personally responsible for all the posts. Using a personal profile for business to promote, say, for example, massage, is actually a violation of Facebook's terms of service. More importantly, though, if your employer were to see your Facebook personal profile page, would you be proud or would you be embarrassed? Some of the things you write, they are publicly visible when people Google your name. Have you ever Googled yourself? Guess what? Your future employers are going to make that part of their interview process to Google your name. And if you have comments on a Facebook page that are embarrassing, your future employers may be reading those. Take personal responsibility for the things that are on the internet and put your best foot forward versus this dude in the picture. There are some business terms and legal terms I want to review with you just so you're crystal clear on what the definition is. We're going to start with defamation. You may have heard that used in the context of defamation of character. Defamation is the communication of false information, spoken or written, about a person that is harmful or damaging to that person's reputation or that person standing within the community. This includes social media that is written. So just keep that in mind. But that's defamation or defamation of character. Prejudice, an adverse preconceived judgment or opinion formed without sufficient knowledge or examination of the facts. Prejudice is usually not based on reason or on an actual experience. I think we're all familiar with prejudice, but we watch it in ourselves. But that's what it technically means. HIPAA. What's HIPAA? Do you actually know what that means? HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. There's not two P's. There's 2 A's. Notice that, okay? And this addresses the disclosure of an individual's health information and the rights granted to individuals, and also breach notifications on how, if there has been a violation of HIPAA laws, how businesses have to handle that. And finally, related to HIPAA, is client privacy. This also, though, in addition to protecting an individual's health information, client privacy means refusing to discuss or acknowledge the name, symptoms, frequency of visits, client opinions, or conditions without written permission, and only with written permission with a professional who will contribute to the care of that client. So client privacy expands beyond those healthcare records, and its client privacy is also sometimes considered client confidentiality. Unfortunately, we have way too many examples of breaches of client privacy or client confidentiality. In California, a hospital employee posted a patient's chart to Facebook and made fun of the patient for seeking STD treatments and birth control. So STD stands for sexually transmitted diseases. And this employee was making fun of them. In Rhode Island, an ER doctor was really upset over the death of a patient and shares that on social media, shared that she's heartbroken. She switched the patient's gender and cause of death to protect her identity. But just wait. Another example in Wisconsin, an ultrasound tech posts that she's thrilled one of her patients is having triplets. The motivation is different here in all three aspects of these shares or these posts on social media, but these stories demonstrate the use of social media in the workplace, and all three are violations of the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. All three of these violate the client's privacy, and that could cost an employer or the actual employee up to a $50,000 fine. Think twice on what you post on social media. You probably heard about this. Sadly, after the death of Joan Rivers, accusations of selfies in the operating room added credibility to the lack of professionalism and client-centered care that was going on in that operating room. Our code of ethics explains this in detail. Here are two of the points. Have a sincere commitment to provide the highest quality care to those who seek our professional services. And we have been told through our code of ethics, we need to conduct our business and professional activities with honesty, integrity, and respect for the inherent worth of all persons. Posting negative things, posting private things on social media about clients or coworkers is an absolute no-go. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of examples of inappropriate posts on social media, but let's move along. Let's go over a few more definitions. Protocol, a detailed plan. And in our case, a protocol is a detailed plan of therapeutic treatment or our procedures. What protocol did we use with that session? Now, a therapeutic consultation, this is a little different. It varies profession to profession, but in massage therapy, therapeutic consultation is a term normally used when working with minors. It refers to the caretakers being involved in the decision-making process for a minor. Therapeutic consultation. Now, professional, one who engages in a profession. What's an occupation? Well, it's a productive or creative activity that serves as one's regular source of income. Now, these definitions may seem very general, very straightforward, very simple. However, while taking the national certification exam, breathe and just read through the different definitions, because at times you are asked to define these very simple terms. A review of a few more terms for you here. Intellectual property. That's a legal concept that refers to the creations of the mind for which exclusive rights of use are recognized. So examples of that are inventions, literary works, designs, architectural designs. Those are all creations of the mind that could be trademarked, copyrighted, or patented. The Fair Use Act refers to intellectual property. It's a doctrine that permits limited use of copyrighted materials without acquiring permission for educational and research purposes. So if it's educational or research, you're good. However, otherwise you'll need permission to use copyrighted material. Fiduciary, here's a weird one. Fiduciary involves trust, especially with regard to the relationship between a trustee and a beneficiary. However, that's not usually how we hear fiduciary used. It's an ethical relationship of trust between two or more parties. So, for example, a board member has a fiduciary responsibility to use the grant money within the scope of the purpose stated. So a board of a nonprofit organization or of another organization has a fiduciary responsibility, meaning they've been put in a place of trust. They've been voted in, and they have to follow the charter, follow the mandate. And finally, insider trading that we hear about in the news sometimes. But insider trading is financial gains that individuals make based on information about a company's stock not available to the public. So insider trading means that an individual or a company has invested in stock based on information that was not readily available to the public. So if a client told us about a particular company that was going public and we bought stock in that company, that would be considered insider trading. So, a few legal terms that we're reviewing for you here on this slide. Let's have a little bit more fun with some legal terms. Franchise. You might be familiar with a franchise. A franchise is a license granted to an individual or a group by a company that enables them to carry out a very specific commercial activity. So, for example, with massage franchises, that's a license granted to an individual or a group of individuals that allows them to carry out specific activities that are outlined very rigidly. In fact, Massage Envy, for example, is a franchise, and they have to follow a lot of rules that pertain to their license. By comparison, sole proprietorship, that's the simplest business entity, and that's just where somebody starts a business. One person operating a business. It's not a legal entity. It simply refers to a person who owns a business and therefore is personally responsible for all of its debts. And then we have the partnership. The partnership is a legal relationship between two or more people in which each person agrees to furnish a part of the money and the work, the labor, to start a business. And each also shares a fixed percentage of the profits and losses. Now, here's something else to just make a note of. In a partnership, as far as a tax form, each partner has to file a K-1 form. Again, that's a tricky question that comes up on the MBLEx exam. So in a partnership, the tax return has to include a K-1 form from each partner. We've got just a few more terms to review. Non-maleficence. Now, for those of you who are familiar even a little bit with Spanish, you'll see mal in there, M-A-L. Mal means bad, and non-maleficence is the principle of first do no harm. Just do no harm. Payer discrimination, random, but charging insurance companies higher rates than clients who don't use insurance. So if perchance you were in a practice that was billing insurance and they used higher rates for the insurance company than they did for people who did not use their insurance, that's considered payer discrimination. All right, just a couple more here on this slide. Harassment. Very different than sexual harassment. Let's look at the difference here. Harassment is the act of systematic and/or continued unwanted disturbing actions of a party or a group that includes threats, pressures, intimidations, demands. That's harassment. And that can be physical and it can be written. Sexual harassment, by comparison, is a solicitation of any sexual act. It's considered any physical advances. It's verbal or non-verbal conduct that is sexual in nature directed at another person. So we have to be careful about that. So harassment, sexual harassment, just as you're taking your test, breathe and read all of the details and then all of the answers. You know, that's where a lot of problems happen. Test taking strategy, spoiler alert, test taking strategy, read through all the answers completely. You will find the best answer. As we wind down with healthcare, business, and legal terms, you may want to reread and familiarize yourself with both organizations' code of ethics. So the AMTA and the ABMP, both of their code of ethics. There are references to both in the test, more so AMTA, to be honest. We have also reviewed in the past the NCB-TMB's 6 standards of practice. I don't know if you remember that from our very first guidelines to professional practice, but we reviewed each standard of practice in detail. Last time you probably did that was in school, so you may want to go back and just Google NCB-TMB standards of practice and read through. because you will be asked questions like the following. And here's an example of questions and rationale that are used during the exam. So it's a test-taking strategy. Standard number 2 of the NCB TMB Standards of Practice, Legal and Ethical Requirements, says a therapist must comply with all legal requirements applicable to their jurisdictions regulating massage. So just think about this for a second. Standard 2 is called Legal and Ethical Requirements. It says therapists must comply with all legal requirements. So there's simpatico there. There's a comparison there. They're using the same words. Likewise, Standard 2 also says massage therapists refrain from any conduct or behavior that could result in illegal or unethical or discriminatory acts. Okay, so right within that standard, legal, ethical, right? So just keep in mind, when a question asks about legal or unethical behavior, it is most likely referring to the legal and ethical requirements of the Standard 2, legal and ethical requirements of the NCB TMB Standard of Practice. Phew, vocab is done. Yes, that vocab is done anyhow. We're moving along to CPR and first aid. CPR and first aid is something that should be up to date. So is your CPR and first aid up to date? It needs to be, to make sure that you are legally able to practice. Typically, it's every 2 years. Double check the card that you got. For some, it's been a long time since you updated your CPR. However, part of CPR, well, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, something else they teach now in CPR is knowing the signs of stroke. And they may not have taught that to you when you took CPR, so I'm going to review it with you now. So knowing the signs of a stroke, and the acronym is FAST, F-A-S-T. You'll want to look at the face. If you are concerned, even for a second, that someone may be having a stroke, you can use FAST to know and to confirm whether or not you should call 911. So face, F. Ask the person to smile. Take a look. Is there any distortion in the smile? Are they drooping on one side? Are they weak on one side? Can they not smile on one side? That is a strong indicator there is something serious going on. And then the A in FAST is the arm. Is there numbness or weakness in this person's arm? They may not be able to tell, so ask them to raise both arms overhead. Can they do that? Are they holding one of their arms in their hand? Does it feel heavy? Does it feel weak? This may be something subtle. So let's move on to the S in FAST. The S in FAST refers to this person's speech. Do they have slurred speech? Do they have trouble getting words out? Do they feel like they have marbles in their mouth? Ask them to speak a simple sentence. Ask them just to say their name. Ask them to say your name twice. Check for the distortion in their speech. Another important signal that this person is in the midst of having either a minor or a major stroke. And finally, the T is time. Call 911 if a person has any difficulty with any of these tasks as soon as possible. Note the time of the first symptom. This information is super important because the faster the person gets medical attention, the less severe are going to be their symptoms, meaning the faster their recovery is going to be. And the information about when their symptoms first started is an important component of the treatment decisions the doctors are going to make. So make a note of the time, call 911, get this person medical attention as soon as possible. That is FAST, fast action when you think there is someone having a stroke. So you may not have covered that in your CPR when you took it 10 years ago. However, 10 years ago, I'm just kidding, 2 years ago. So one other term I want to review with you before we move into sanitary hand washing is a term called professionalism. Professionalism is one of the standards of practice for the National Certification Board of Therapeutic Massage and Bodywork. And I just want to give you some examples of how professionalism shows up in our practice. Conducting any communication with other professionals in a friendly and professional manner demonstrates professionalism. When we show respect for traditions and the practices of other professionals, that fosters friendly relationships and it demonstrates professionalism. Wearing clean clothing, modest clothing, and at times embroidered or screen printed with the company's name or logo, that type of clothing, when you represent the profession of massage therapy, that demonstrates professionalism. So dressing in modest, appropriate clothing demonstrates professionalism. So are we having fun yet? Yeah. Now we get to talk about sanitation and cleanliness. Here are some fun facts about hand washing. I wish the entire world knew these facts about hand washing. You know, it's estimated that washing hands with soap and water reduces diarrhea disease-associated deaths by 50%. People who actually die from having stomach-related issues, 50% just by washing your hands with soap and water. Guys, really, it's not that big a deal. Take the time to wash your hands. In fact, researchers in London estimate that if everyone routinely washed their hands, 1 million deaths a year could be prevented. In fact, hand washing alone can reduce the risk of respiratory infections by 16%. And even if you don't have soap and water, the use of an alcohol gel hand sanitizer in a classroom experiment provided an overall reduction in the absenteeism due to getting sick, catching the flu, being infected by almost 20% amongst 16 elementary schools. That's 6,000 students. 20% absenteeism was reduced in 6,000 students. That's a huge number. Simply by washing hands with soap and water. Don't skip it. Take the time to do it. So how often do we need to wash our hands? Well, here are some suggestions. Before, during, and after preparing food. Before eating food, before and after caring for someone who's sick, before and after treating a cut or wound. How about after using the bathroom? After changing diapers or cleaning up a child who has used the toilet? After blowing your nose, coughing or sneezing, it's a good idea to wash your hands. After touching an animal feed, or animal waste. After handling pet food or pet treats, and after touching the garbage. These are all good times to wash your hands or to use some alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Something that wasn't mentioned in our previous when to wash your hands, obviously after doing a massage is a time you need to wash your hands. And how do we wash our hands? Well, the Center for Disease Control recommends these 5 steps, and these 5 steps are actually on the MBLEx exam. One of my students got the question, what's the 3rd step? Good Lord. So, wet your hands with clean running water, warm or cold. Turn off the tap. Don't let the water run. Go ahead and apply the soap. Lather your hands by rubbing them together. Be sure to lather the back of your hands between your fingers, under your nails, and scrub your hands for at least 20 seconds. That's step number 3. Scrub your hands for at least 20 seconds. So if you're not sure how long 20 seconds is, the recommendation is to hum the Happy Birthday song from beginning to end twice, or 2 verses of Old MacDonald Had a Farm is also recommended. Rinse your hands well under clean running water, and then dry your hands using a clean towel or air dry them. And of course, as you exit the restroom, it's a good idea to use the paper towel on the handle as you exit, so that for those folks who didn't wash their hands well, you're not picking up their germs off that door handle. One more step that is good to incorporate, but not officially recommended by the CDC. So what happens when you don't have soap and water? Well, soap and water is the best way to reduce the number of germs on your hands in most situations. If soap and water isn't available, using an alcohol-based hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol. Now, sanitizers quickly reduce the number of germs on the hands, but they don't eliminate all types of germs. In fact, hand sanitizers are not as effective when your hands are like visibly dirty or greasy. But if your hands aren't that bad, how do you use a hand sanitizer? Well, apply the product to the palm of your hand, rub your hands together, rub that product all over, rub the sanitizer all over the surfaces of your hand, the back, your fingers, in between your fingers, and rub until your hands are dry. That allows the hand sanitizer enough time to work to kill those germs. So there you have it. Sanitary hand washing from the Center for Disease Control. Our next segment has to do with the review of common psychological terms as they are used in the practice of massage therapy and as they apply in the practice of massage therapy. In the past lecture, we referred to transference, and I wanted to revisit this term because it's a very common term in bodywork. A famous continuing ed educator, Ben Benjamin, authored a book called The Ethics of Touch, and he defines transference as clients that defer to the practitioner's judgment because they want to be helped by an authority figure that possesses a greater knowledge, a greater healing ability, and therefore a greater power. Since there is a power differential that exists in any healthcare relationship, the client may be inclined to respond to the practitioner as he or she would have other authority figures, and in doing so may recreate elements of a similar past relationship, meaning that transference has to do with the client transferring feelings to the therapist, and it's based on usually childhood experiences. So it can be an authority figure that was a parent, an older adult in their life, maybe even an authority figure that was, a legal authority figure. But it's the client transferring feelings toward the massage therapist based on childhood experiences. By comparison, countertransference is when the therapist transfers feelings or issues from childhood onto a client, and the therapist tries to get their own needs met through that client relationship. And here's a few examples. Wanting to be friends with clients, thinking that you have to take every client that calls, working with cancer patients exclusively because you're past with cancer or another specialty, say an abuse victim or a sports team because you wanted to be an athlete, but working with them particularly because of a past experience that you wanted to meet a need that was unfulfilled. And even countertransference can show up as working with a client longer than the required time, the scheduled time, to quote unquote get better results. That is transferring the therapist's feelings, our feelings, onto the client. We're trying to get a result. We're emotionally invested in that result. And it really has nothing to do with the client. Those are all examples of countertransference. However, the basics are the therapist is transferring their feelings to the client versus transference, which was the other way around. Another common psychological term that shows up on our massage table at times is post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. And it's considered a mental health condition, and it's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing a terrifying event or witnessing it. Symptoms of PTSD include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as the inability to control thoughts about the event. Now, by comparison, Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological injury that results from prolonged repeated trauma. PTSD can be one time, experiencing it or witnessing it. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is prolonged repeated trauma, and oftentimes it's in the context of captivity, dependence, or some type of being trapped. So that's what makes it prolonged. But understand the difference between complex PTSD and PTSD as the difference between prolonged trauma and a one-time event. Other psychological terms you may hear in your practice: hyperarousal. That has nothing to do with sexual innuendo. It's a state of constant alertness to danger experienced by survivors of trauma. It also describes a chronic state of fight or flight. So could you understand someone with PTSD maybe to be in a state of hyperarousal, a constant state of alertness to danger? Might make sense, right? That's hyperarousal. Confrontation. It's the act of facing and dealing with a problematic situation, to confront it. And intrusion. This is a psychological term that means that information that is related to the theme of a certain memory wasn't actually part of the original memory, wasn't actually a part of the original episode. However, somehow it's become associated with the event. So something completely unrelated has now become related to a certain event, but it wasn't actually part of the original episode. That's called intrusion. A few more terms to review with you here that are common psychological terms. Boundary. We talked about this in our earlier Guidelines 1. That is a limit that is adhered to in order to separate and protect the integrity of all parties involved. You may remember also a boundary is something that separates one country from another. It separates one person from another, and it's a limit that is adhered to in order to separate and protect the integrity of both of those parties. Denial. Denial is a defense mechanism that involves the active refusal to acknowledge the full implications of an unpleasant reality. Some people are in denial about certain things, but that's a defense mechanism, and it's an active refusal to recognize the full implications of something that they'd rather not look at. It's a psychological term. Now, finally, assertive language. Assertive language is clear communication. However, assertive language is not only clear communication, but it has minimal emotional content. Voice tone is neutral, not monotone, but it's natural. It's not hostile, it's not whining, it's neutral. And assertive language is used so that the person who's listening is not upset. So it's clear communication, but it is void of emotion. Often used by a therapist during an intervention, assertive language is effective. Here's a word that often confuses massage therapists, and that's the word reflexive. When a client becomes emotional after meeting their massage therapist, because their massage therapist resembles a relative that has just passed away, there's a reflexive response. We might think of it as transference, but they're not actually transferring any feelings. The client recognizes that the therapist is not their relative that has just passed away, but there's a reflexive effect because the massage therapist resembles either in appearance or in mannerisms, and that creates that reflexive response. Self-esteem. It's a psychological term that reflects an overall emotional evaluation of one's own worth, abilities, and self-respect. So hopefully everyone listening has healthy self-esteem, a healthy view of your own worth, abilities, and self-respect. And lastly, dual or multi-dimensional relationships. We spent quite a bit of time on this in the last guidelines to professional practice. So I'm not going to dig into it. I'm just going to remind you that a dual relationship is an overlapping relationship with a client that the client therapist share in addition to the therapeutic relationship. So maybe it is the client is a relative of a boyfriend, or the client is a personal relative, or going into the grocery store, we see a client. Sometimes these dual relationships are accidental and unavoidable. However, as massage therapists, we must be prepared to resolve these accidental and sometimes unavoidable situations. And in our last lecture, we learned how to do that. But just remember, dual or multidimensional relationships are relationships that exist between the client and therapist outside the treatment room, outside the clinic. All right, you hanging in there? We're in the home stretch, I promise. Now, a little bit easier stuff. Draping. Yes, draping. So the NCBTMB Code of Ethics says, provide draping and treatment in a way that ensures the safety and comfort and privacy of the client. So to maintain professionalism and the modesty of our clients, massage therapists are trained to securely drape their clients, uncovering only the body part that they are actively working on. And how do we do that? How do we securely drape? Well, we will ensure the comfort and warmth of our clients by using both a sheet and a blanket. That ensures their modesty as well. To drape appropriately, move the blanket out of the way first. Maintain coverage with the blanket of the half of the body that's not being worked on. And also, as you see in this image, cover the shoulders for extra warmth. So what does it look like when we securely drape? Well, when draping the back, we tuck under both hips. That should be palm down, pressing into the table, tucking under the hip. For both sides, that means you're going to have to walk to the other side to tuck in that sheet on the opposite side. I'd like to see you try tucking with palm down from standing on the opposite side of the table. Almost can't be done. Tuck the sheet also when you're working the leg. Tuck the sheet under the same leg you're working, and then again under the hip when working on a single leg. And for a more secure feeling when working the arm, lift the arm, move the sheet under that arm while you're working on that side. Once you're done working, cover that arm again with the sheet and the blanket. Don't leave it out. It'll probably make the client feel cold. Pull that sheet up over the shoulder and touch gently, tucking just a little if you'd like. It's a nice, secure feeling for our clients when we tuck at the hip, we tuck at the leg, or we tuck under that arm. When you get a massage, do you like a secure drape? Well, your clients do too. Let's move along though. Ethical decision making. So I'm going to share with you a 7-step intervention model for massage therapists that's been adapted from Robert's 7-step model. It's a psychological model. You can see it listed here. Now, for massage therapists, it reads a little differently, and we have guidelines to follow that are very clear if we think a client is potentially sexualizing the massage session. You ready? 7 steps. You can modify it if you need to, but here are the original 7 steps in the 7-step intervention model for massage therapists. Step number 1. If you think a client is sexualizing the massage, whether it's from a noise you hear, a movement you see, the very first step is stop the massage. Hands off. Hands are by your sides or behind your back. This is body language that demonstrates you are going to be asking a question and you're going to be paying attention to the answer. So hands off, and you stop the massage as step number 1. Step number 2 is you will describe the behavior you are concerned about, saying something like, I notice a physical change in your body. Are you uncomfortable? I notice that you're moving around quite a bit. Are you uncomfortable? I notice that you've been making some noises. Are you uncomfortable? You are going to describe the behavior you are concerned about in a question form. In step number 3, you're going to ask the client to clarify the behavior. I didn't understand the comment you just made. Could you give me a few more details about how you're feeling? I didn't understand the action and the movements you've been making. Could you give me a few more details about how you're feeling? Or maybe, I didn't understand the noises you've been making. Could you give me a few more details about how you're feeling? Now, hey guys, you never know. Your client may need to use the bathroom. Your client may be falling asleep. So we're asking some clarifying questions to find out the intention, to find out how your client is receiving this work. If your intuition is kicking up, we need to ask a clarifying question. I hope that makes sense. After you ask the clarifying question, our next step is step 4. And step 4 is to reinstate the intent and professional boundaries. Now, red flag here. If you have to restate the intent or your therapeutic professional boundaries, it might be time to end the session. I'm just saying. However, based on that client's response, it may be time to restate your professional boundaries in this way. As a therapist, you may say, this is a therapeutic massage designed to address your pain and improve your overall health. Was that clear to you when you made your appointment? If the client says no, or, oh baby, then step number 4, it's time to say, gee, that's too bad. Almost all of our clients understand that this is a non-sexual massage. Given the information you've just given me, I'm going to end this session. Please get up, get dressed, and I'll let them know at the front desk you'll be out to make your payment. Bang. You always have the right to end the session. If your intuition, if there is something going on in that session that's a red flag for you, share it with your manager. Share it with another adult that's in the building. And again, saying something to the effect of, wow, that's really interesting. Almost all of my clients understand that this is a non-sexual massage. Given the information you've just given me, I'm going to end the session. Please get up, get dressed, and I'll let them know at the front desk you're going to be out to make payment. Your coworkers have your back, and you can explain to a manager what's going on. And hopefully there are staff around that will go ahead and take full payment. Here's the deal though. When the client pays in full, the therapist is paid for the session. If the client does not pay, then there needs to be a conversation with the manager because the policy is the therapist is not paid. If the client doesn't pay, the therapist usually isn't paid. Just saying. And that kind of stinks. However, I would rather the client not pay and the therapist not get paid than to continue on in a session that is super uncomfortable. I think you'd agree, right? Technically, step number 5 is evaluate the response that your client has given you. If you have been given verbal indication that this client would like something more than a therapeutic massage, then we easily move on to step number 6. And in step number 6, you decide to continue or discontinue the session. Now, if the client says honestly, wow, I just really have to use the bathroom. Wow, I was fast asleep. I'm so sorry. Was I making a noise? You can honestly, based on that response, decide to continue the session or discontinue the session. Your intuition is the measuring stick. We will trust your judgment on that. And I mentioned it was a 7-step intervention model. So after you decide to continue or discontinue the session, you must document the situation, whether you finished the session or you did not. Please make a note in the chart of the behavior that concerned you. Why would you want to do that? Yes, because if a coworker is going to work with the same client, wouldn't it be fair to give them the heads up that you had a red flag that went off? Even if you weren't sure, even if you were 50-50, just to put it in the notes to say, there could have been a concern here. That way, if the same issue comes up for the next therapist, they don't think they're crazy. All right, so go ahead and in step number 7, document the situation. That will complete the 7 steps for this intervention model. Woo! Wow. All right, so what did we cover in this course? We have covered the category of general professionalism. We talked about your attire and the importance of clear communication. We also reviewed healthcare business and legal terms, including client privacy and what is HIPAA. We reviewed the national standards to practice massage, and you are completely familiar with the fact that you need to graduate from an accredited program, have liability insurance, ask your employer to pay for it, pass the national licensing exam, and complete a background check. You don't do it, but the people in the state do. You also understand now social media and the intention behind social media, especially Facebook. You know the definition of posts. We reviewed the definition of defamation and prejudice, along with a lot of other terms. You are familiar now with franchise, sole proprietorship, and partnerships. You are completely clear on the CDC's recommendation for sanitary hand washing. We've reviewed some very common psychological definitions and some not so common ones, and their application within the field of massage therapy. We touched on draping. What is safe draping, appropriate draping, and how to communicate about draping. And then also our final topic was how to resolve ethical issues while in the treatment room. Boom! What a course! Very familiar now with each of these topics. Good job! That means it's a wrap! Woohoo! We're done! Yay! Congratulations, and thank you so much for hanging in there with me on a tough topic. I know this stuff isn't riveting, but it's necessary. It's necessary that it's fresh in your mind when you sit down for your national exam, for your massage and bodywork licensing exam. This is going to benefit you quite a bit, and you're going to take this information that you have just learned, and you are going to go ahead, your next assignment is to go ahead and complete the quiz that's at the end of this chapter. So good luck with the quiz, and high five, and I'll see you next time. Good job.